Okay, welcome back. Our next talk is going to be on opportunities in health informatics and information technology. And we're very pleased to have as our presenter, Dr. Jonathan Lovins. Dr. Lovins is an Assistant Chief Medical Officer at Duke Regional Hospital, just part of the Duke University Health System down in North Carolina. He's also a practicing hospitalist. His information technology experience includes implementing a $1 billion EHR system for a 1,500-bed, 2,000 physician healthcare system, and being the lead physician for EHR adoption, training, content creation, and optimization. Dr. Lovins earned his BA at Clark University in Massachusetts, go Worcester, and his MD at UConn, and completed a Master's of Management in Clinical Informatics at Duke University School of Medicine. Dr. Lovins is board certified in clinical informatics and is a senior fellow in hospital medicine. So a warm welcome back to Dr. Jonathan Lovins.
Thank you, James. Welcome everybody. I want to be talking about informatics careers for physicians. It's something that I've been involved with for quite a while now. So again, I am the Associate Chief Medical Informatics Officer for both Duke Regional Hospital and Duke Raleigh Hospital, which are two of the three hospitals in the Duke Health system. And it's been a very rewarding career. It was a very good move, and I encourage anybody who is interested in a non-clinical clinical career or an informatics career to pursue it if it's something that interests you. So, what is medical informatics? Well, it's a very, very broad field, and it encompasses a lot, basically the application of information technology to the medical field. And as you can imagine, that's very, very broad. And most people who work in medical informatics are working with the EHR. There are some that do other stuff behind the scenes with big data and prediction rules and things like that. But I would say most of us, particularly the MDs, are involved in the electronic health record. So basically, everything that providers and many times nurses and others, how they interface with the EHR, whatever it is, we are involved. And so this would include documentation and notes, orders, order sets, test results, which include labs, radiology. We do a lot with alerts to try to kind of nudge people to do guideline-based care, evidence-based care. We do a lot of analytics. We do reports to get data to justify changes to the EHR. Flow sheets, which is a really a big part of how nurses document things. We're involved with that and calculators and many, many other things. So the first question I think a lot of people have is how much does it pay? Well, the great thing about being a doctor is that almost anything that you do as a doctor outside of the medical field, you get paid at least as much as you get paid as a doctor. That is not that is true for generalists, for internal medicine doctors, primary care doctors. We had one cardiologist that was a physician champion for Epic when we transitioned to the Epic EHR, and he took a big pay cut, as you can imagine, because cardiologists just make more, and they were not able to bring up his salary. So that's a consideration. But I think, as a hospitalist, I made exactly the same amount doing the informatics work. And the reason for that is because the value that a physician brings, and even advanced practice provider, is the value is based on the medical training and your ability to work with physicians and other providers. And so that's the reason. There are analysts who are doing informatics who don't have an MD who don't make the same amount. So unless you're a very highly paid specialist, you don't necessarily have to worry about a pay cut. But there's other benefits, which I'll go into, which some might consider even if it pays a little bit less. So I just want to talk a little bit about my journey, which wasn't an easy journey, but I got to a good place. So when I was in college, I always thought I was going to be a psychologist because my father was a psychologist. My mother was a psychological clinical social worker. I knew a lot about it. I found it very interesting. But as college progressed, I was encouraged to go into medicine from different people for a few reasons. It's a profession where you really get to help people, and that's very satisfying. You get to earn a very good living while you're doing that, which is kind of rare, I think. And then also, one of the reasons that medicine was an attractive field is because you can do many other things with an MD. Even just within medicine, the variety of work that you do is so wide. Like you could, you go to the same medical school and you could be a radiologist and if you don't want to work with patients, you could do radiology as long as it's not interventional. You could be a pathologist. Um, and then if you really love working with people, you could, do clinical medicine. If you love talking to people, you could be a psychiatrist. If you choose to do therapy. And then on top of all that, you can do things on the side, including informatics and many other things. And finally, it's very intellectually stimulating to do medicine and be a doctor. So I was very tempted. So I was pre-med in college. I was the first. It turned out I wasn't, but at the time I thought I was the first member of my family to become a doctor. My step grandfather was a psychiatrist, but um, and so I the problem was I was starting to take some basic science courses, but I was so into my graduate level psych coursework at college that I just wasn't ready. So I dropped out of a couple of my science classes and I continued on with my psychology. Um, and I was a research assistant in psychology for a few years after graduation. But the more I thought about it, I wasn't sure that this was the right path for me for a few different reasons. I actually did apply to graduate school, got into one, but I didn't get any financial aid. And so at some point, I was like, okay, well, I kind of like computers and I kind of like medicine, but I'm not 100% sure. I was a little scared of being a doctor. I didn't know if I could do it. Um, and I took a course in C++ plus plus just to see if, hey, maybe computer science is the right field. It definitely wasn't. I was not a good programmer, and which is interesting, as I'll talk about. But so after a couple more years, I was like, okay, I'm ready. I finished up my coursework in community college, did very, very well, loved it this time, and applied and got in. First thing I did after my MD, I decided to go into hospital medicine because I found it very interesting. I liked the idea of being a generalist and having a wide variety of diagnoses. I liked the idea of being sort of the quarterback of the healthcare team. So I did 2 years as a hospitalist. I applied for GI, that didn't work out, and then I ended up after 3 years becoming a medical director, and I did that for about 3 years. I enjoyed that very much, um, uh, although I didn't do it beyond the 3 years. And while I was doing both clinical and administrative work, I was always kind of drawn to projects that involved quality improvement using the EHR. So in residency, I looked into getting e-prescriptions, and then as a director in Connecticut, I was involved in trying to improve the informatics that we used. And then Eventually, I moved to North Carolina, worked at Duke clinically, and the first thing I did was I started a project on medication reconciliation, which was sort of just starting out. Um, and then we had the High Tech Act, which brought in billions of dollars to hospitals to convert to EHRs, and that's what we did. And what James was referring to, we spent $1 billion um, converting from our homegrown electronic health record to Epic, which is um, the largest EHR for academic medical centers and maybe for all medical centers. Um, and so Many academic hospitals hired physician informaticists to implement it, and I was fortunate to lead the physician adoption at my hospital to Epic. And because of that work, I was able to do more. I wasn't getting paid for that informatics work. And then we have a great program in our hospital medicine um, program where you get paid a little bit if you work 24 hours per 6 months. So that was good. So I got to get some reimbursement for the work I was doing. Um, and before that, I think there was a couple of years where I didn't get paid anything extra, which I think is something sometimes what you have to do to demonstrate your worth before they're willing to give you either money or time. And so the next step after the leadership project was to get a 0.25 FTE from the IT department to do informatics. And the idea was that I was going to support both the health system, but also the singular hospital that I worked at, sort of as a resource for them. And then a couple years after that, things were going well, and I got to 50% clinical, 50% informatics, and I did not ask to go beyond that because I feel like at 50% that's like the perfect sweet spot for me, where I feel like I get enough clinical experience where I feel confident with my clinical skills, but also I have enough time to do the informatics. Because when I was 25% informatics, um, even though I had less work to do, it was kind of hard to get it done because I was working so much of the time that you either had to like wait to respond or work on something, or you had to do it while you were seeing patients, and neither of those were ideal. So 50% for me has been perfect. Um, then after that, I still had the option of doing a leadership project or incentive. So I became chair of the ethics committee. I joined the peer review committee. And then unfortunately, that was paid directly, so I couldn't use that anymore. So then I got involved. The person who was managing our expert witness program, who basically kind of vets cases and gave gave talks every couple of years to orient people. So was asked to take over that. So that is what I do. Um, and so what do I do? So clinically, um, everybody works 16 shifts a month. So because I'm 50%, I do 8 shifts a month, which you can imagine is quite nice, especially as a hospitalist, since we do 7 on, 7 off. So I could basically do 1 week plus a day, or 1 week of rounding plus one, admitting shift, and that's it for the month. So that's kind of nice. Um, I get paid the same amount for that work as I do for the clinical work. Um, the benefits and PTO for me are the same. They're actually managed by my clinical department. I keep track of my non-clinical hours and I submit them. Um, what is the work? So the work is it's different things. A lot of it is a lot of meetings. Um, a lot, which as many of you know, are some are productive, some are not. And a lot of the work is getting emails, responding to them, and then a subset of those would involve, setting up meetings to make decisions or making requests to the analysts for enhancements to the electronic health record. And so the two main things that I work on are enhancements of the EHR, so to make it better, or to add a new thing, or to fix problems. We have sort of unintended consequences of changes to the EHR that I'm sure you're all aware of. It's nice work because I get to work with lots of different people. So I work with physicians, APPs, nurses, pharmacists. I'm often the sort of go-between the doctors and the analysts, or the providers and the analysts who are the ones who directly make those changes. Um, by the way, I'm uh, as the ACMIO and a physician champion, I am also a physician builder for Epic. So I've taken the course to build stuff. Most of the providers, and I think all of them, it's very time consuming to build stuff themselves. So sometimes we'll build stuff as proof of concept, but most of the time the analysts are doing most of the legwork. Um, and a lot of the work is coming up with designs by consensus. So working with stakeholders, a lot, because we're a health system, and I think most majority of hospitals are probably within a health system. Almost all changes have to be done for the entire health system, not just for one hospital. So a lot of it is meeting with the stakeholders and getting buy-in. and getting data. And once you have all that, you can make requests and make changes if they're approved. All right, so here are some examples of projects, and one second. Okay, so here are some examples of projects. So, um, uh, building a congestive heart failure order set, that was a fairly big job. Um, we created a SOFA tool. SOFA is the is sort of the new version of sepsis. It hasn't completely penetrated, but it's being used in certain situations. I was heavily involved with a pilot for critical lab notification via Haiku, which is the mobile application for Epic EHR. We built an order set for the tracheostomy team. We worked on the blood conservation program, which is to help avoid blood transfusions for patients who refuse, who don't allow blood transfusions, typically Jehovah's Witnesses. We created best practice advisories for echocardiograms and cardiac rehab for patients who had myocardial infarctions. We pre-checked hemoglobin A1C in the insulin order set if the patient hadn't had one in 3 months. There was an orthotics consult order, a multimodal pain medication order set, and a smartphone app for the health system. And I'll go into a little bit of detail for some of these. So for CHF, uh, we had three different hospitals, and we got cardiologists and hospitalists and nurses together to come up with a consensus. Wasn't so easy. Two of the three hospital, well, one of the three hospitals had very specific ideas what they wanted in there, and not everyone agreed. And we actually ended up creating a separate order set just for that hospital, which we didn't do that again. So anyway, the kinds of order we put in there, Lasix, ins and outs, daily weights, echocardiograms, and we used evidence-based medicine and guidelines, and the order set is used quite a bit. The SOFA tool, again, SOFA is kind of like sepsis. It's a scoring tool in Epic. And the reason this was kind of an interesting story because the reason we did this was the beginning of the COVID outbreak, and they had been rationing ventilators in Italy when this first started. If you remember, it hit Italy very hard. It hit New York first in the United States, and there was a lot of concern about whether they'd have enough ventilators. So New York and then other states after that created a system to score people's chances of survival. And if the chances were low, then they would not get a ventilator. And I'm very thankful that we never had to pull the trigger on this. But it was a very interesting application of EHR to deal with possible rationing, which never happened. This is what the SOFA score um, looks like, and I wanted to show my face. Okay. And so this is basically there's a series of systems. You get a certain number of points for each system, and then you get a score. All right. Okay. So what is the typical work? Typical work is for critical lab notification was we created a system of automatic notification for providers via smartphone. And this was to one reason to do this was to decrease expenses, so we wouldn't need as much manual work, and also to shorten the turnaround time for notification. And I designed the workflow, we validated the build. The hardest part, it turns out, for this was provider adoption. We had a very difficult time getting every provider to use their smartphone. And it's still an issue. I think we're getting better, but yeah, that's not an easy nut to crack. We created an order set for the tracheostomy team. We worked with respiratory and speech therapists from three hospitals, and we created an order set, which worked out well. Blood conservation system, we designed a best practice advisory or alert when ordering blood if it was known that the patient did not accept blood products. We created two best practice advisories for myocardial infarction. So basically, it was a rule that if a patient had an MI that admission, and they didn't get an echocardiogram ordered or cardiac rehab wasn't ordered, you get an alert to remind. And we found that this improved utilization, so that was great. Um, we had a lot of patients who um, had diabetes or pre-diabetes, but they hadn't had a hemoglobin A1C checked for quite some time. So what we did was we created a rule so that if you are using the insulin order set for diabetic, and this was, I don't know, not 100%, but if you did use it, and if the hemoglobin A1C had not been um, tested within 3 months, then it would automatically pre-check the order. And these are the kinds of informatics changes that I like the most, the things that are behind the scenes. The provider might not even know that it's happening. Um, and it's just very smooth. And there's a lot of informatics um, changes that uh, interrupt providers' work, and that can cause something called alert fatigue, where you get so many alerts that you actually end up overriding all of them, which is not a good thing. So these are the kinds of things that I love to see. I created an orthotics consult order, which sent an automatic email to the orthotics vendor. This was a big one, the multimodal pain medication order set. We'd had one for orthopedic surgery, which included, both opiates and non-opiates, because a lot of people, I think there's overutilization of opiates. There's a sort of a lack of awareness of what kinds of things you can use, what are available for pain that are not opiates. So we created, so this was again a large multidisciplinary team from all three hospitals, and we included orders for both opiates and non-opiates, and we had hospitalists, psychiatrists, anesthesiologists, nurses, and pharmacists, and it's a great order set, and it's used a lot. And then I think this is the last one. We created a smartphone app for the health system, and we worked with analysts basically to have just one place that had all the important information, particularly phone numbers for departments in the hospital and other things. All right, so what are the pros and cons? So start with the pros. It is really doing something non-clinical can really help with burnout. Um, I would say like for the first 10 years as a hospitalist at least, um, I could work as much as I wanted and it wasn't a big deal. But as I've gotten older, I appreciate my nights more, and my weekends more. So if you're 50% non-clinical, everything's prorated. So you get half as many nights, you get half as much call, you get half as many weekends, you get half as much direct patient care, which could be, that could be a plus or not, depending on the person. There's less stress, less burnout. The nice is flexible time. So, when I'm not in seeing patients, so when I see patients, I'm working 10 hours in a block, and I do that 8 times a month. And when I'm not seeing patients, I need to put in the equivalent of that, which is um, 12-hour shift times 8, which is 96 hours. So I put in 96 hours a month. Sometimes I put in a little bit less, and I take out 1 or 2 days of PTO. But it's not going to be 10 hours in one day. It could be 6 hours in one day. It could be 0 hours in one day. But it's really up to me, and it gives me a lot more time to do other things as well. You can work from home, which can be a plus or a minus. So um, the um, cons, there is less interaction with other people. So if you're a person who kind of thrives on interpersonal interaction, there's a little bit less of that with non-clinical careers. Um, it can be very intellectually stimulating, but there are times where it's not as intellectually stimulating or exciting as clinical medicine. So that's one thing. That can also be it can be a good thing. It doesn't call on the same degree of training. I was always kind of very surprised that I could be paid for half of my time to do something that I didn't necessarily have any training in whatsoever. Now, that being said, the value, like I said before, of doing something non-clinical is your medical training. So your medical training does does support you in this role, but they did not ask me to do any kind of training, get any kind of degree to do informatics. It was really kind of, okay, you're a doctor, go work with, go work on the EHR and you learn on the job and you'll work with the analysts. That being said, I wanted to have some kind of training, just for my own self-confidence, to help me with my job, to be seen as a peer, because most of the others in my at my level had some kind of training. So I did end up getting a master's degree, which I'll talk about in a second. Um, and um, and I think that was very useful. Another con is that it can be hard to be disciplined when you're working from home. There's a lot of distractions, and you really have to kind of tune things out. And if you have kids, it can be a little challenging to balance, being there for the kids if they need something during the day, and then getting all your hours in. So those are the cons. They're not very big cons in my opinion. I think it's very important to stay clinical. So um, you should I would say at least 25%. I mean, you maybe you can get away with 10 if you have a very high administrative position that requires a lot of time. Um, but patient care, I think, makes you much more credible. And I would personally would not want to do 75% non-clinical work because I would just feel too isolated. Um, and uh, just something to keep in mind, there are some states that require um, you to be at least 50% clinical, at least for, for something. So for example, expert witness work, which I do, there are some states that require you to be at least 50% clinical. And that doesn't mean you have to work 2.5 days of the week. If it just means that of the work that you do, 50% of it has to be with patients. So if you're semi-retired and you're working 2 days a week, that's fine as long as you're not doing more than 2 days of um, of the non-clinical work per week. And then again, there are some states that don't care. So types of informatic positions. So I would say in the beginning, people who express interest can become a super user, and this can be offered through your hospital or health system, or it can be done through Epic itself. And that just, gets you more familiar with the tools that not everyone may be so familiar with. The next step would be a physician champion, and that's when you get some dedicated time to work on informatics projects. The next step after that would be where I am, the Associate Chief Medical Informatics Officer. Some of the names of these positions will be slightly different, but I think there's a lot of similarities. This is a leadership position. Above that, we have Chief Medical Informatics Officer, which is a senior leadership position. Some hospitals have a Chief Health Officer or Health Informatics Officer. And then finally, the top position would be a chief informatics officer. And even that position is often held by an MD, but doesn't have to be. Okay, training. You do, please do not feel that you need to be a programmer. I think maybe most of the analysts are programmers, but even as an analyst, there is even the building that they do, it's not really like computer programming, if you've ever done it or read about it or seen it. Um, and certainly as a provider champion or ACMIO, you do not have to know programming at all. I know a very basic amount of building techniques, which is helpful, but programming, no. And I also wanted to say that, I don't even know. I don't think a lot of people are going to be doing programming in the next 10 years from now, because it turns out that these large language models, these AI programs, can actually do pretty much all of the programming, it looks like. So I think people should not worry too much if they don't know how to program, or if they don't want to learn how to program, or if they're not good at programming like me. I was not particularly good at it. Um, all right, so I do think it's helpful to get an informatics degree, like I mentioned, and some examples are, so Duke has a really great one, and if anybody's interested in learning about it, you can just search for that. on Google. It's called the MMCI, Master of Management in Clinical Informatics. I got that degree a few about 8 years ago, and it was great. We also have an informatics fellowship if you're really hardcore, in which you get that degree and you do a fellowship, and a lot of those people get positions at Duke afterwards. The American uh, Medical Informatics Association, AMIA, does have a short course. It's less than a year. Oh, and by the way, the MMCI is only 1 year and it's part-time and it's totally doable. The 10 by 10 course is, I think, 6 weeks, so it's much shorter. Uh, some people get MBAs, some people get Masters of Healthcare Administrations, and there's many other degrees. I do think it's very helpful to have good people skills, working with providers, working with analysts. Um, Many people are members of organizations. I'm a member of the Society of Hospital Medicine. Um, some people are members of the HIMSS Society, which is the Medical Records Society, AMIA, and go to some of the conferences. I pretty much just go to the Epic conferences. Um, there's a limited amount of time and limited amount of CME money for these things. So that is pretty much all I have, and I wanted to see if there are any questions.
Just working on my IT to unmute myself, so I need to call my super user. Thank you very much, John. Excellent, excellent. Um,
Thank you.
I did have a few questions. So my understanding is, and it's okay if you don't know, that's fine. My understanding is that there's kind of three main areas that physician informaticists, if I can pronounce that correctly, get
You
into.
did.
Um, it's almost as bad as nurse anesthetist. I always have a problem with that one, but I think I did okay today. So obviously what you're doing on the provider side, and I'm going to ask you a few questions about that, but also the government, which I don't want to talk about today, but I guess we have to, and the vendor. If you
Mm.
know, can you describe the types of roles that a doctor might have at a place like Epic, a place like Allscripts, the vendors for these EHR? Do you have any insights on those, doctor?
A little. I do a little. It's interesting because in terms of non-clinical careers, I mean, why not go to the source and work for Epic? I'm sure it's a terribly exciting place to work as a provider. They have many doctors and maybe APPs as well at Epic. I think a lot of them work full time. One thing that I have heard is that the providers that work at Epic do not do clinical medicine. I don't know if it's true, but that's what I've heard. I believe it because a lot of the things that they build for us, when it comes right out of the box, it's pretty good, but there are some things where like, well, they didn't think that out carefully. So, and that's where my work comes from because, I would say a good chunk of what I do is adapting, modifying, improving what Epic has already. I mean, gosh, we spent $1 billion. You'd think that we'd have something ready to use. But there are many. Duke did this more than other health systems, from what I have been told. But um, uh, we did a very large amount of customization when we transitioned to Epic, and we continue to do a lot of stuff. And that's Epic's model. They provide lots of things that are called foundation, that are not necessarily meant to be the final word, and hospitals will and health systems will, modify them, improve them, adapt them to their system. So the doctors that work at Epic, um, they're very, very good. At least the ones, well, the ones that I've interacted with are oftentimes the presenters, um, and they're very, very good. They have very good communication skills, very good people skills. But I would say, like, if that interests somebody, I would definitely pursue it because and if it's true that they don't see a lot of patients, I would have considered doing it, but I definitely want to keep seeing patients, and maybe you can. I don't know.
And just a little bit of follow-up on that, Dr. Levins. So on the vendor side, obviously going to like a HIMSS meeting or an Epic meeting would be a good way to meet some of these doctors. Would you also, if you want to do networking, would you also agree that maybe reaching out to people in the IT department like yourself at the hospital. You could get an introduction to doctors that work at Epic if you want to do networking, or I would say Epic is generally because there's all kinds of vendors, something like that maybe.
Absolutely. I mean, I personally, I don't think I know any of the doctors there well enough to do that, but um, I I think that the higher you go, the more likely that people have personal relationships and could introduce you for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now, the government, I'm kidding around because it's March of 2025 right now, and they're losing about 10,000 employees a day. Um, so,
Mm.
do you have a sense as to in HHS, for example, what some of the roles might be? And if you don't, that I totally understand for physician informaticists.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I know lots of doctors that have worked in government, not in informatics, but just a lot of people, mostly the NIH, which, as you know, is
Mhm.
uh, contracting right now. I don't know if that will last, but informatics for the government, I don't know too much about that. I will say that uh, in my expert witness work, you know, I do mostly hospital medicine expert witness. I also do informatics expert witness, um, and in both scenarios, I've been asked by the government to help with federal cases. So that's pretty different from what you're asking, but there is definitely an interface.
All right. So your job is to interface with the clinicians who are having a problem or to help them design things and everything else. So for being in the business that I've been in all these years, one of the number one complaints that I get from doctors is EHR,
Yes, it is
frustration.
a huge, yeah, it is a huge source of frustration for people, and I think the reasons are worth thinking about. So I think there's like three big reasons I can think of. So one is that the technology is still very immature. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, before Epic, they couldn't really do very much. And now they do a lot. But because the interface is still a little bit clunky and they're trying hard to improve it, it's just, it's not something that doctors really train. I mean, nowadays doctors are being trained in the EHR because they're using it during their medical school and residency. But I would say like for older doctors in particular, you know, they didn't train with this stuff. They might not have even grown up using a lot of technology, and so I think for a lot of people who it's just not second nature, it's very frustrating to try to navigate. There's bugs. It's not like it used to be where you could just, you know, jot a few things illegibly on the note. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that things were better before the electronic health record. They were better for they might have been better for doctors, but they weren't better for patients. So, so I think you have to think about, okay, well, there's a little bit of pain, it'll get better, but it's making things safer, we believe, and there's some data on that. But so that's one reason is that it's a little bit clunky, and also that not everyone's adept at it, and also I think the EHR brought a lot of extra work to the physicians. So some of the things that we used to have, one of the things that automation does is it has the computer take over what were previously human tasks. So, like the one piece where we saved money at Duke with our $1 billion investment was that we got rid of our transcriptionists. That was the only money saving that we realized, at least in the beginning. So, but even though the computer's doing it, the provider is still the one clicking everything. And so it's extra administrative burden on the provider. And I'm hopeful that, just like, with cell phones and cars, like the way out of the mess with, distracted driving is that we're going to have well, we do already, but I think we're going to have, it's going to be pervasive, the self-driving car. I think for the same idea with healthcare. Healthcare has gotten very complex. There have been a lot of administrative burdens on providers using the EHR to do things that other people used to do. And I'm hopeful that AI is going to help us out of this mess. And there's going to be a lot of things that AI will do for us that, if it can be done safely, that will allow us to focus more on our interaction with the patients. And I'll just say one thing about that, which is that the coolest, most impressive thing so far from AI has been ambient um, documentation. So the last two times I saw a doctor, they pressed a button on their phone, they didn't type a thing, and the computer just recorded everything that was said and wrote a note. And then they modified a little bit to make sure it was accurate. But that is a huge satisfier, and that's taking away a lot of the administrative burden from fire. So I'm hopeful that that kind of thing continues to progress, and that um, we're not going back to paper, but I'm hopeful that the EHR becomes easier and more fun to use.
And so my question is, how much of the frustration gets pointed in your direction from your colleagues?
Not a ton. You know, when you say this, what immediately pops into my head is when we first made the transition to Epic, there were certain types of providers that were more that had more difficulty than others. And so I met with different specialties to talk about, how are you going to use Epic in your specialty? And there was only one specialty that really gave me a hard time. I sat in a room with several orthopedic surgeons, and they're used to just, going in the operating room, doing their own thing. They don't write very much. I think their residents do a lot of the legwork, and boy, did they unload on me. But beyond that, it hasn't been bad.
Excellent. Now, the masters and the other training programs that you described, and maybe I missed this. Can you take some of those online?
Oh yeah, I think a lot of them are purely online right now. And in fact, the one that I did, there were a couple of people who did it completely online because they were just living too far away. So I think yes, if you want to do something completely virtual, I think there's a lot of opportunity.
And what journals or publications, if you wanted to be positioning yourself to do this work and get in the know and see what's going on, learn lingo, what journals would you recommend that your colleagues read?
So, the cool thing about informatics is that it's so pervasive in medicine and other fields too, is that you're going to see informatics articles in every journal. It's such a hot topic right now. But there are journals that just focus on informatics. It gets a little bit geeky, but certainly if you're very interested, you can look at the Journal of the American Medical Informatics Association. That is probably the most prominent one in terms of high quality articles, but there are others.
Thank you, Dr. Lovins. And the last question I have is, obviously you love seeing patients and you have, and other reasons you want to stay seeing patients. Let's say you want to advance and we're going up the food chain here, chief medical information officer, all these other things. Um, what are we talking about if you know for pay there? Are we talking about obviously a bump in
Oh,
pay if you're doing something like that?
so I think the higher you go, the more you're going to make. I mean, that's true for everything. So as an ACMIO, I don't get paid any more than I than I do as a physician. Um, uh, but if you and so I guess the next step. So if I was a chief medical informatics officer, my salary would probably be higher. I don't know. I can't give you a number, but I could guess. But I think
Okay.
it's going to be similar to to any kind of leadership role a physician might have. They're going to make more than what they would if they were just seeing patients.
Yeah, so the point is that there's room for advancement. You just like where you are. It's not like you can't advance. It's just that you've chosen
Um,
not to.
I could advance if I wanted to. I
Yes.
don't I don't think there's an enormous right now there's not a huge it's interesting, the people that I work with have been doing very similar stuff for the last 10 years, and there haven't been a lot of promotions. There was one of us got a promotion, but I don't think, the people that I work with are very happy with what they're doing. They're making enough money, and they're enjoying the work, and I don't really get the sense that any of us are chomping at the bit to move up. Um, I mean, I wouldn't turn it down, but I don't have any burning desire right now.
Dr. Lovins, thank you so much for coming back and doing this. Very much enjoyed your talk and I learned a lot.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.